Do you know the painful experience of losing yourself in a relationship? And I want to bring in this idea of looking in a mirror. Do you know what it's like to look into a mirror and not be able to find yourself, to not see yourself? It's very upsetting to realize that you do not know who you are. And many of us arrive at this awareness after years of attachment trauma and some form of emotional neglect. We know who we are based upon the mirroring of other people. People mirror back to us who we are, who they see, and we share aspects of ourselves and they reflect those back to us. Now, what if that reflection, what if that mirror that's doing the reflecting is not reliable or full of bias, assumption, and projection? And what's being mirrored back to you is not actually who you are, but you are impressionable, you are growing in life, you are relying on the people you care about to mirror back to you accurately who you are, and you therefore believe the reflection of self being mirrored, and you internalize that. If what's being mirrored, if we're talking about attachment trauma, it has something to do with emotional neglect and absence and emptiness. Your emotional needs are not being acknowledged or fed or nourished. And what you're receiving back is the absence of connection. We internalize this absence of connection as, well, there must be something wrong with me if I'm not uh, feeling connected with. If the other person is not making an effort to actually know me, I must not be worth knowing, or in fact, maybe there's nothing here to know. And if the other person is not mirroring curiosity about who we are, then over time we also might imitate their behavior, and that we lack curiosity for ourselves. So that when we do look in a mirror, all we see is absence and emptiness. As adults, we simultaneously want to be in relationship. We attempt to create new relationships. And we say to ourselves, it's going to be different. It's not going to be like these other relationships where we had an unreliable mirror, or the messaging that came back to us was that there is something lacking. And so therefore we thought that we're lacking. And this time we're going to do it differently. But unfortunately, we are attracted. The brain, oftentimes, especially when it has to do with trauma, there's trauma reenactment, there's repetition compulsion, there's this repeating of patterns, even though we renounce the pattern. Years can pass, and we are almost surprised, dumbfounded, just shocked, like, how did I let this happen again? I told myself going into it I didn't want this kind of relationship. And nonetheless, we notice the pattern of yet again feeling unseen, feeling undernourished, feeling undervalued. The phrase crumbs, accepting crumbs of relating. Attachment trauma is about what I call the inverted relating, or it's the absence of nourishment, it's the absence of emotional engagement. And we have developed a tolerance for very small amounts of connection and engagement and attunement. It's also called, from brain science, limbic resonance, which is this experience as if like you get plugged into the electric grid and all of a sudden your nervous system is firing on all burners, and there's this joint synergy of life, of an energy of like, now we're in relationship, and you feel like you're seen, and you feel like you're valued, and there is a shared experience of being in synergy, synchronized. Think of dancing, when two people are dancing and you don't quite know where the choreography ends and begins. You don't quite know if one person's leading or the other person's following. It's that experience of relational flow. Those of us with a history of some kind of emotional neglect that over time showed up as developmental relational trauma, the attachment trauma, that it impacted it, the greatest impact, besides not quite having skills to create healthier type of relationships, the greatest consequence is our own sense of self has been the target of that attachment trauma. The greatest impact is to our worth, and that when we look into a mirror, we don't quite know what we see, because the mirror that we had looked into in the past was either very limited and sparse, was based on some absence, not presence, or the mirror we looked into, in fact, was cracked, those holding up the mirror. There's this poem that I like. It's a Rumi poem, and I like it for purposes of grief because it's about grief, but there's a mirror image which fits here. It says, the grief for what you have lost lifts a mirror up to where you're bravely working and expecting the worst. You look, and instead you see the face that you've been wanting to see. I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience of heartbreak, that when something really suffering cracks us open, suffering wakes us up, and suffering holds up a mirror and says, this is who you are, like, pay attention. And so it's very paradoxical because it's painful, it's hurtful, it's not fun, it's not enjoyable to experience loss, and you're going through grief, but you're kind of waking up in the process and you're discovering things about yourself, which is that poem. The grief for what you have lost lifts up a mirror to where you're bravely working and expecting the worst. Instead, you see the face that you have been wanting to see. The poem does not share that for some of us, when we look in that mirror, the actual mirror is cracked. And I'm talking about an inherited mirror. I'm talking about the ability to see. I'm not talking about your innate worth or your core goodness or your brilliant sanity of who you are as a human being. I'm just saying the actual skill of seeing. It's not about your fundamental nature, but the fact that you have not learned to discern and be able to start discovering a new reflection of who you are. Because we often default to the old core beliefs, the old framework, which oftentimes for many of us is what we would call trauma mind. That there's this way of seeing the world through the lens of our wounds. And in fact, the healing process is not to fix the belief that we're broken, but to realize that we're simultaneously whole and we've never been broken. That's the basic goodness. And we tap into your humanity and realize that the way that others saw us is unreliable. There's another poem. It's a George Herbert poem about love. And I like it because the narrator, assuming it's George, talking to love and says, love made me welcome, said, come in. Love made me welcome. And the narrator enters and he realizes, oh, I can't even be here. Like, oops, sorry. Like I'm not worthy to be here. And it's a poem about his shame. And he says, I can't even look at you, love. Love says, oh, my dear. Love smiling, being gracious, welcoming him into the room of love. and says, well, I know you can't see me because your vision is marred. And then love says, I didn't do that. You're doing it to yourself because you're perpetuating this belief that you're broken and that you have shame and that there's something wrong with you and that you don't even deserve to enter this room of love, let alone sit down, have a dialogue. Love says, come in, sit down and eat. Like you're having dinner with love. The sadness that we carry of being unseen by others translates into how we perpetually hurt ourselves by also not seeing who we are. We diminish and dumb down our needs, our demands, our wants, our desires, and we make ourselves the reflection of those around us, not questioning that the only way to have others see us is for us to see ourselves, which of course is so cliche because we're right back to, well, if you want to be loved, you have to love yourself as well. And that's a bit of a challenge because for some of us, we didn't learn how to love ourselves until someone else also took a risk and we woke up simultaneously through the eyes of someone who was able to see us. But we have to be willing to look in that mirror and willing to find a new mirror. There's a lot of images that come to mind, speaking of mirrors, speaking of poetry. But if you're lost yourself in relationship and then you feel lost within yourself, it's almost like you're an unmoored boat. You're a boat floating through life, but you don't quite know where to dock. And the word groundedness really applies here because if you're an unmoored boat and you're just floating in water, there's this feel you have no solid ground. And what we're talking about is having a solid sense of self. And that's not something that we create over a weekend or a workshop or 3 sessions of therapy. It's really an invitation to redo developmentally, to go through a process of discovering yourself. And it gets a little complicated in meta. What we mean is you discover yourself discovering yourself, which I know sounds crazy. Meta in the sense of like meditation, it's working with your mind. Meta is about thinking, like, how do I think? How do I think about my own thoughts? How do I know myself through the experience of knowing myself? Or to describe meditation, we say it's paying attention to paying attention. We're strengthening an observer self. And the process of seeing yourself, discovering yourself, which I know sounds like a lot of double speak here. What starts to happen is a resonance, the same way that two people dancing, there's this synergy and they're in flow and there's an attunement. You're starting to like attune with yourself. There's an alignment, a centering, and dare I say, mirror image. You start to see reflected back to you. The attunement is the reflection back, checking in with your body, with clients all the time. Say, how's your mind? How's your heart? How's your body? What do you notice in this moment? Take a breath. Your arms, your legs, your stomach, your spine, your feet, your fingers, your toes. Who are you now? What is calling your attention now? And the messaging, the internalized messaging of absence, of you don't matter, when you look in a mirror and can't find yourself, that links to shame. It is shameful that the history, the parent, the caregiver, the family, who they themselves, most probably empathy to them, compassion to them, they were not mirrored either. Perhaps they've never seen their own face in the mirror either. Perhaps they don't know how to create self resonance either. They're not asking themselves how to know themselves more. They're not questioning the way that they mirror back to the world what they see. And that might be hurtful. That might be lacking. That might be full of bias. That might be full of aggression. But when we think about the history of where we come from, and we're looking to experience a new process of seeing ourselves for the first time, it's the complete opposite of losing yourself in relationship. The paradox is that you are showing up able, willing to be seen. And in the process of seeing yourself, you're strengthening the ability for others to see those parts of yourself that you want seen. I remember working with a client. I had a experience of valuing her. Just my work is very fortunate in that it's about intimacy and vulnerability. And we share an experience, a professional relational exchange of intimacy. And I get to see the other person's goodness. And my job is to be the mirror, a mirror to reflect back what I see as accurately as I hope I can do as a skill, but to do it through the lens of compassion and kindness. And if they inherited any shame and question their worth, we need to separate out these hard, harsh judgments of character and access what's underneath. We develop the ability to direct compassion and kindness so that they can recognize themselves. And here's the meta aspect of this client that I'm talking about, where she recognized herself recognizing herself. That was exactly the story that she shared when she was at the gym and she's on the treadmill and it's at night and there's this big window. And because it's at night, it was reflecting back to her. She could see herself clearly as if she's looking in a mirror and she's on the treadmill. And she oftentimes historically has been very judgmental of herself and her body and of her image in the mirror. And she reported a week later when she came in for a session, she said, "You know what? I finally understood. I finally got what you mean, what you're talking about when you tell me that I am a beautiful person. And when you tell me that I'm tenderhearted, and the way that you encourage me, and the way I feel being encouraged." She said, I finally get it. I saw myself on the treadmill in that image in a way I'd never seen myself before. She said, I accepted myself. It was the projection of the judgments, the worthlessness, the not being here, being invisible. She said it was like an apparition, like all of a sudden I appeared. I had presence. And that's what we do relationally, therapeutically, in that example with that client. But what she was describing is she was showing up for herself and she was allowing herself to see herself for the first time. And so next time that she's with someone who doesn't mirror back to her that same level of curiosity and joy and appreciation for the image in the mirror, she's going to know, no, I don't want to be in a relationship with that person. I will lose myself in the false image. And I yet again will have to return to being invisible and unseen if I want to stay in relationship. And that's really the rub. That's the intersection, is that we realize that we perpetuate not being seen. And that's why when we talk about this, and it's very painful to say it this way, but you know what I'm talking about. It's that experience of, it's a self-betrayal. It's painful to talk about in those terms because it we've internalized the mechanism that hurt us, and we were never responsible for the mechanism that hurt us, but because we've made it our own and we're actually operating our brain mapping, and the fact that we continually don't see ourselves is the perpetuation of the trauma wound itself. We became our own oppressor. Painful, painful stuff. The Rumi poem, the grief for what you've lost lifts a mirror up to where you're bravely working. So, what have you lost? We have to be willing to lose the cracked mirror. We have to be willing to lose absence. We have to be willing to lose crumbs of relating. We have to be willing to lose our fight and tenacity and this powerful, powerful, misplaced loyalty and effort, a grand effort to be seen by those who cannot see us. We get hooked in that place very easily. If I am lost in a relationship and I cannot see myself and I'm with people who don't see me, I will work harder and harder and harder to try to get you to see me, because if you don't see me, I don't exist. And yet I'm perpetuating that same child dynamic where I have no choice and I need to keep trying harder, be bigger, blame myself, judge myself, practice perfectionism, people pleasing, all of the symptoms, all of the behaviors, pretzel myself to be something beyond what who I am, just to try to entertain receiving connection back so that I can get my attachment needs met. The grief for what you have lost lifts a mirror up to where you're bravely working, expecting the worst. You look, and instead you see the face you have been waiting to see. Like my client, she took her years and years before one day she said, "You know what? I understand what you're talking about. I accept myself. I really, I appreciate who I am. And I don't have to keep looking away." This video is about the process of acceptance. We're not striving for a different way of seeing, to be different. We're striving to create a companionship with who you already are. The phrase that often shows up here is radical self-acceptance. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that it is helpful. We're talking about how we lose ourselves in relationship and ultimately lose ourselves by not being able to identify ourselves. And it's a process of acceptance. My work as a therapist with clients is that delicately understanding, having a sensitivity that perhaps the client is yet to be able to see themselves. So therefore, they're trusting me to see them and even come into the relationship, the therapeutic relationship, with some fear and maybe even being frightened of what I might see. And to their surprise, often, time and time again, after 23 years, what is revealed is that they become more surprised that I see their goodness, and that what we discover together is this innate core quality of brilliant sanity and basic goodness. And we nurture and cultivate a deeper kindness and strengthen what I see in them, but so that they can continually see that in themselves. Thank you. See you next time. I hope that this was helpful.